Welcome back to Chapter 3, Settling the Northern Colonies. Today we're going to discuss the development of the Middle Colonies. Old Netherlanders at New Netherland. By the early 17th century, Holland emerged as a major commercial, military, and colonial power after a protracted war to free itself from Catholic Spain. In the East Indies, the Dutch maintained their empire for over 300 years due to the early success of the powerful Dutch East India Company with its army of 10,000 men and a fleet of 190 ships. In the Caribbean, Africa, and Brazil, Holland established profitable colonies through the less powerful Dutch West India Company, with most of its energy focused on the East Indies. In 1623 to 1624, Holland's Dutch West India Company established New Netherland on the Hudson River. Its center of trade was New Amsterdam, which was a company town. The colony was tightly controlled by the company's stockholders and by governors through appointed directors general. The governors did not permit religious freedom, democratic practices, free speech, or anything which might interfere with the colony's profitability. Vast feudal estates called patroonships were granted to land promoters who agreed to settle 50 people on their estates to work for the benefit of both landowners and the company. Within the colony, members of the Calvinist Dutch Reformed Church and Quakers were subjects of suspicion and savage abuse. Despite strict measures, New Netherland attracted a cosmopolitan population from different countries, most of whom, including Dutch settlers, felt no particularly loyalty to the company or the colonial governor. In 1664, England's King Charles II granted the land occupied by New Netherland to his brother, the Duke of York, without regard for Dutch claims to the area. The Duke of York, supported by a squadron of English warships, appeared off New Amsterdam and demanded the governor, Peter Stuyvesant, surrender the colony. Stuyvesant, who was lacking in strong defenses, ammunition, and citizen support, surrendered New Amsterdam without firing a shot, renaming it New York. This territorial acquisition gave the English an unbroken control of the Atlantic seaboard from Maine to the Carolinas. Still, Dutch influences survived in New York, including its aristocratic flavor, monopolistic land practices, architecture, places names such as Harlem, Brooklyn, Hell's Gate, social customs and folkways such as Easter eggs, Santa Claus, sauerkraut, bowling, skating, golf, and waffles. William Penn created a holy experiment in Pennsylvania. In 1681, King Charles II granted William Penn a huge tract of land, fertile land, lying west of the Delaware River and north of Maryland, which was compensation for a monetary debt owed by the Crown to Penn's deceased father for service to Oliver Cromwell during the interregnum and to Charles after the Restoration. Penn, a Quaker convert, sought to establish an asylum for Quakers from the persecution they suffered under England's civil and religious authorities. Pennsylvania's population grew rapidly, partly due to Penn's strong advertising effort and because of the thousands of Dutch, English, Welsh, and Swedish settlers. Pennsylvania's government was remarkably fair and tolerant, paying the Native Americans for their land, welcoming Native Americans to live among them in peace, outlawing any tax-supported state religion, permitting freedom of worship even to Jewish people and Catholics, placing no restrictions on immigration, imposing the death penalty only for murder and treason, making the naturalization process easy, and making no provision for a military or a militia. These provisions reflected the deep Quaker devotions to principles and convictions that embraced opportunity but abhorred strife and warfare. Quakers also believed in 1. An open, generous God who loved all people equally, 2. Egalitarian church services in which men and women could assume positions of religious leadership, and 3. Avoiding the creation of a social hierarchy based on class, which they considered false and evil. Despite their liberal views, Pennsylvania authorities passed blue laws prohibiting ungodly revelers, stage plays, card playing, dice, games, and excessive hilarity. By 1700, Philadelphia had a population of 5,000 and had become a thriving commercial center involved in the import and export trade in grains, manufactured goods, and textiles with the West Indies. Penn himself only spent 4 years in the colony before returning to England, where he suffered a few tragic remaining years, in part because he maintained a close relationship with deposed Catholic monarch King James II. Authorities in England arrested Penn 3 times on charges of treason and threw him in a debtor's prison for a time. After suffering a paralytic stroke, Penn died ultimately in poverty. The middle colonies had some common features. And the middle colonies that we're discussing are New York, New Jersey, Delaware, and Pennsylvania. All of them had extensive fertile soil. They all became the bread colonies because of grain exports. Rivers like the Susquehanna, the Delaware, and the Hudson all tapped the interior fur trade. And industry stimulated commerce and the growth of seaports like New York and Philadelphia. The middle colonies were midway between New England and the southern plantations. Landholding was intermediate in size. Local governments were somewhere between personalized town meetings of New England and the diffused county government of the South. They had fewer industries than in New England, but more than in the South. They also had distinctions of their own. In the middle colonies, there was a more ethnically mixed population and an unusual degree of religious toleration and democratic control. There was desirable land that was easy to acquire, and considerable economic and social democracy. All the American colonies during this time period flourished under Britain's continuing hands-off policies or salutary neglect.